Story 1. My name is Cheryl and I'm 26 years old. I work at a corporate company in the city, and on the weekend I used to love to get away from all the hustle and bustle and take a trip to the countryside. I have a cabin in a small village, which is located right at the edge of the forest. I used to love to get out of the city and spend the weekend in my little cabin, but I stopped after this happened. It was a year ago. After a hard week of work, I needed to rest, so I decided to get out of town. I went home and packed my bags, threw them in a trunk, and drove off. When I arrived in the village, it was already evening and I was tired from the long drive. I went straight to bed and fell asleep quickly. In the middle of the night, I was awakened by the sound of my car alarm going off. I looked out the window, but there was nobody in sight. I found my car keys and pressed the button to shut off the alarm, and the awful noise stopped. I laid back down and tried to fall asleep, but all of a sudden the alarm went off again. I didn't feel like getting up, so I just grabbed my keys from the table while still lying down and pressed the button once more. Everything was peaceful and quiet again. However, 5 minutes later, the alarm went off a third time. Once or twice could have been an accident. But now I was wondering what was going on. Could someone be playing tricks on me in the middle of the night? I got up again and pressed the button to turn off the alarm. But this time I didn't lie back down. I stood behind the curtains and watched to see what was causing it to happen. After a few minutes, I saw something in the light of the moon. A shadow emerged from the bushes and slowly approached the car. I could just about make out the shape of that thing. It was something tall, skinny, and black. The figure reached out with its long, thin arms and knocked on the car. The alarm went off again, and quick as a flash, the figure retreated back into the bushes. At that moment, I realized what was going on and began shaking with fear. I turned off the alarm and continued to watch. The thing emerged from the bushes again, slid silently over to the gates, and removed the partition holding the gates closed. I was paralyzed with fear and I couldn't move, and mind was overcome by panic thoughts. What was it? What does it want from me? What was it doing? Would it go away on its own? A shiver ran through my body from my head down to my toes. My mouth was dry and my heart was beating fast. I was so tensed that I was gritting my teeth and clenching my hands into fists. I regained control of myself and ran down the stairs as fast as my legs could carry me to the ground floor. I wanted to look for something I could use to protect myself, however. Just as I was about to switch on the lights, I suddenly froze in my tracks. The dark figure was at the window. It was pressed up against the glass, staring and looking to see whether or not there was someone home. I immediately ducked down and hid behind the sofa and peered out. I couldn't take my eyes off its hideous face. Its skin was the color of ash and covered with wrinkles, and it had big black eyes with no iris that covered half of its forehead. And instead of it having a nose, there were 2 ragged holes. It didn't have any lips, and it was making a hoarse sound that was misting up the window. I knew it wasn't going to go away. After standing at the window for a few moments, I heard a rustling noise as it came to the front door. I watched as it tried to push its fingers through the gap under the door. The handle began to twitch wildly up and down. The creature spoke something in a gibberish language. It was not like a human voice. I was still crouched down behind the sofa, hiding in the shadows and desperately trying not to make a sound. Tears began involuntarily streaming down my face, no matter how much I tried to stop them. I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples, and I was shaking like a leaf just waiting for it to end. I had left my phone in my bedroom, and I was too scared to go get it and call for help. I don't know how long I waited down there. I must have passed out when I woke. I looked out the window. The creature was gone. The door was still in place and everything seemed secured and normal. I have never been so relieved in all my life. I ran upstairs and looked out the window. It was already morning and there was no sign of anything wrong. Taking a chance, I grabbed my keys, and without stopping to collect any of my things, I ran out to the car, jumped in, locked the doors, and drove away from the village as fast as I could. I didn't stop driving until I got back to the city. When I got back to my apartment, I turned on the TV and saw a news report. The reporter said that 2 girls had gone missing from the village, and there was a man who claimed to have seen a UFO early in the morning when he was out herding his cattle. I guess the creature found what it was looking for. I still wonder what would have happened to me if I hadn't made the right decisions. Story 2. The existence of extraterrestrial beings is a subjective topic. The universe is pretty vast with billions of galaxies, and personally I believe that there might be other creatures living in those galaxies which we generally refer to as aliens. This is the story of my aunt. I don't remember much of what actually happened, as I was 10 years old at the time. She doesn't talk about it much, but recently my aunt told me about her experience, and I was astonished when I heard her story. I will now narrate the story from my aunt's perspective. I was 25 back then. I was working in a small retail shop that was beside the highway. That day I had a night shift and was all alone as my coworker had taken leave because he was sick. It wasn't the first time I had been given a night shift, and it was going very normal. It was wintertime time, so there were not many customers. Around 10 p.m., the roads were almost empty. I had my headphones on, and I was sitting at the cash counter. As soon as it struck 12, I started preparing to leave. I gathered my stuff from my locker. But before leaving, I remembered I had to take out the garbage. I picked up the garbage bag and left through the back door, which led to the dumpster. I dumped the garbage and was making my way back inside the store, but out of nowhere I was struck by a beam of light. It pulled me forcefully, and I went flying towards the unseen force, and midway I went unconscious. The next thing I remember is I woke up in a sealed plastic bag. I thought I had been kidnapped. I screamed and struggled to get out, but it was vain. A few moments later, someone opened the bag and let me out. I fell to the ground, and I saw the feet of the one who opened the bag. They didn't look like a human's feet. What was this creature, I thought, and when I looked up, I saw two unusual-looking creatures who were talking to each other in some unknown language. As soon as I saw them, I screamed, and one of them closed my mouth with a slimy tape-like thing, tied me up, and dragged me into a room filled with bright white lights. I figured out what these creatures were. They were aliens, and they made me lie on a table, tied my arms and legs on either side, and stripped off my clothes. I can now clearly see them as they stood beside me. They had big eyes that almost covered their faces, unusually big heads, and skin almost like ash. One of them came closer and ripped the slimy tape off my mouth and made me eat a jelly-like substance. It was tasteless, but had a weird texture. After that, they put me inside a big cylindrical tube, and it was hard to comprehend what was going on. I fell asleep, and I didn't know what time it was. One of the aliens came and woke me up, grabbed me by my hair, and took me to the same room. They tied me up, fed me the same jelly, and injected my arm with a syringe. It was very painful, and I screamed at the top of my lungs. They examined and scanned my body, drew out my blood, and took my saliva. I looked around while still lying down on the table. There were roughly 8 or 9 aliens in that room. I couldn't escape even if I tried. They would outnumber me, and I didn't know where I was, whether I was still on Earth or not. I thought they would kill me if I tried to run. I didn't want to take a chance. I was scared and alone. After a few tests, they put me back inside the cylindrical tube. This went on for days. The same routine every day. I would cry in my cell thinking about my family. I wondered if they were trying to search for me. I just wanted to go back home. I had gotten weaker since they didn't give me food to eat. They only gave me that jelly. I was surviving on that. I was dehydrated, and I tried to tell them that I needed water, but they didn't understand me. I lost count of the days. I hadn't seen any sunlight, and I didn't know if it was day or night. I begged them to let me go, but they didn't. Eventually, dehydration got me, and I was no longer able to stand. One of them came to check up on me. I was just lying on the ground, and it poked with something but was unable to respond. The next thing I knew is that I passed out. I woke to the sound of sirens. A man found me lying on the ground and called the ambulance. A woman tried to bring me back to consciousness and asked for my name. Jane, I said, and passed out again. The next morning I woke up in the hospital room and saw my older brother sitting. He saw me waking up and asked me how I passed out. I told him everything that happened, but he told me that I was found unconscious by a man. He was a truck driver and had stopped by the store as he saw the lights were still on. He went in, but there was nobody around. After a while, he went to the backside to check if anyone was there and found me lying on the ground. I was not responding, so he called the ambulance. My brother said that I might have had a bad dream while I was unconscious, as it had only been a day. The doctor came in and said that I passed out because of dehydration, but I knew what I had seen was all real. Story 3. I grew up in Pennsylvania. My town is surrounded by a thick forest. My family lives on the outskirts of the town, but like the rest of the town, our house was also surrounded by forest. If you took a look from the back porch, you would see nothing but sprawling trees for miles. It is kind of isolated, and out of my house you could scream at the top of your lungs, and no one would come to help you. This happened in the summer of 1998 when I was just 11 years old. I had a childhood friend named Martin who was the same age. Our fathers worked together and knew each other very well. He would come over almost every Friday to hang out. We would go hikes often, and one day while hiking, we were feeling a bit daring and went further into the forest than we usually did. There was this barrier of trees and overgrown bushes that we would never go past, simply because I didn't know the area beyond that point. We continued past the barrier into uncharted territory. We eventually came upon a clearing, and in the middle of this clearing was an old-looking shack. Being the curious young boys we were, we of course had to see inside. As we approached, I could feel the temperature around me drop. I'm no stranger to the cold, but this was in the middle of summer. Even at my age, I could sense that there was something truly sinister inside this shack. A part of me was screaming to hightail it out of there, but my own curiosity pushed me forward. We both stopped just outside the shack, and suddenly we were both too frightened to move any further. We were both frozen in place, staring at the slightly open door of the shack as it swung slowly from the wind. The sky seemed to grow even darker since we discovered this shack, and though we were standing directly in front of it, we could not see inside. A dark hand with unusually long fingers slowly emerged from the slight opening and reached out to us. I fell to the ground. The hand slowly turned and made a beckoning gesture with its index finger, and that's when Martin and I heard it speak. It spoke an unknown language. It sounded as if it was growling. I don't remember much about what happened after that. I just remember Martin and I running for our lives, tearing through the woods. We didn't care about the scratches and bruises. We just needed to get back home as soon as possible. I do have a vague memory of me briefly looking behind as I ran to see a tall gray figure that almost looked like a lizard with long arms that reached its knees and a bone-like tail. Upon returning, Martin called his mother to come to pick him up. My mother saw us crying and asked us what was wrong, and we both explained to her that we saw some kind of creature in the forest. My mother ultimately dismissed our claims and led us in prayer while we waited for Martin's mother to arrive. Martin never came back after that, and we sort of drifted apart. Sadly, he began hanging out with the wrong company and began doing hardcore drugs when he was around 14. He ended up hanging himself in his bedroom when he was 17. As for me, I suffered from severe night terrors for years after that day in the woods. I also became an alcoholic. I moved out of my house, found a job in the city, and began attending AA meetings. I'm glad to say that I turned my life around and now have a beautiful family. I still visit my hometown every now and then to check up on my aging parents. Whenever I'm there, I always visit Martin's grave and think about that day. I'm still convinced that what we saw that day in the woods contributed to his death. Now that I have some perspective, I think what Martin and I encountered was an alien. There were also rumors about people seeing UFOs around the mid to late 90s. Story 4. I live in Oregon, which has a lot of open areas like farms, lots, and just open fields. We also live about 6 miles from the nearest city. My parents own a lot of land, including our backyard, which is a well-kept area, and then it turns into a forest. About 10 years ago in 2013, for about a week or so, I remember hearing weird noises from out in the forest. One day my father said he was grilling, and he went inside for maybe 3 minutes. But when he came back outside, the grill was open and all of the meat was gone. He thought maybe it was the raccoons. He grilled another day and the same thing happened. After the second time my father went to check the tapes, there were CCTV cameras surrounding all 4 corners of our house, and what he saw were no raccoons. It looked something like the aliens shown in movies. It was very skinny with no hair on its body and eyes that would not be considered human eyes. My dad was a jokester, so I was convinced that he was making it all up and playing a joke on me. He also told my uncle what was going on, who is a police officer. He called him over to the house, showed him the clip, and asked what he could do. My uncle didn't take him seriously, just like me, because he would often pull up different pranks on us. But to shut my father up, he told him that he would look into it. They decided not to tell my mom because she would freak out. I had never seen my father so concerned and tense before. I thought it was just great acting until I woke up out of nowhere that same night and heard the same sounds I had been hearing before. My room was in the back of the house on the 2nd floor, and I always kept my window open, so I looked outside in the darkness of the forest for a minute or so, trying to figure out where that sound was coming from. I made the dumbest decision of my life when I got up and decided to go investigate. I picked up my video camera and went into the woods. I had to see what it was or who it was messing with me. I watched a lot of military and spy movies, so I decided to sneak up on whatever this was with my camera. I silently kept walking into the forest with my night vision on and documented what I had caught. Upon going further, I came across what looked like a distorted creature. It was the same thing my dad had caught on his CCTV camera. I ran as fast as I could and didn't even bother to look back. When I got home, I looked at the video clip and saw a horrifying image of a creature that didn't look like a human or any animal that I had seen before. It had glowing eyes and a crouched back. Its spine was clearly visible and it was growling. And that was the sound I kept hearing every night. I didn't tell my dad about this because I thought it would make him worry more. We moved out of that house in 2015, and luckily no such thing happened here yet. Story 5. This happened a few months back. Many people in our town started disappearing, and nobody knew what was causing those disappearances. Some believed there was a serial killer out there, but no bodies had been found yet. Some believed it was the deed of some evil forces, but there wasn't any evidence. I am 18 and have just started college. It is just me and my mom since my dad passed away when I was a kid, and mom never got remarried. Since the disappearance had started, my mom has become very scared and cautious and wanted me to be careful as well. She told me to come back home before it got dark, and I did, not because I was scared, but to reassure my mom. One day it got pretty late because I was in the local library and didn't see the time. My phone was on silent, and when I took a look at it, I saw several missed calls from my mom. She was going to be very pissed, I thought to myself. I quickly packed my stuff and left the library. It was only 9 p.m., but the streets were almost empty. Maybe people were scared to come out at night because of the strange disappearances. I shoved it off and started walking towards my home. The distance from the library to my house was not very far, but farther than the rest of the houses, as ours was a bit on the outskirts of the town. We live in a small town and everything here is pretty close. I had my earphones on, and I was listening to music. We had to take a narrow route and cross a creek which was beside a forest to reach my house. I still had my earphones on and I was crossing the creek when suddenly my body froze. I wasn't able to move. What was happening to me? The music playing on my earphones stopped and I heard weird talking noises coming from behind me. Someone was stalking me? I might have not heard the footsteps because of the loud music. How stupid of me, I thought. They were coming closer and my heart started to race. They came in front of me and I was shocked to see 3 literal aliens facing me. I still couldn't believe it. They took me deep into the forest. I was still frozen, but somehow I was floating in the air. What is this advanced technology? I thought to myself. After what seemed like an hour or so, we got deeper inside and there was an open ground. I had never seen that ground before, even though I've explored mostly every part of the forest. One alien took out something that looked like a remote and pressed some buttons and a UFO appeared. It was big and looked like a giant disc. They took me inside and put me in a cell. There were multiple cells, and inside those cells were people who were abducted before me. A few moments later, they took a handful of people and took them somewhere. The screams of the people could be heard from there. I got so scared that my hands started shaking, and many thoughts flooded my mind. What were they going to do with us? Are they going to kill us? Is this where I'm going to die? I calmed myself down and started thinking rationally. I started looking for stuff in my pocket. Maybe I could find anything useful. I heard someone whispering. "Can you hear me?" whispered a girl. I got closer to the wall and said yes. She was also kidnapped by the aliens a few days ago. She told me there were 5 people with her inside the cell. I asked her where they were taking the other people, but she had no idea since she had been in that cell for days and they hadn't taken her out yet. She also had no idea where we were. Nobody did, because they were taken here unconsciously. Only I was the one who had seen the place. I told them that I could take us out of here as I had seen the exit. They all got really happy. I had become their only hope. I told them that first we needed to get out of these cells. The girl said it wouldn't be a problem as she had a plan ready. We just needed to wait for the right time. Story 6. This story is about the incident that happened to one of my friends in high school. His name was Josh and we'd been friends for a long time. We went to the same school and he lived just a few houses away from mine. We had a group of 3. My other friend's name was Max. We were 14 back then when this happened, and I will never forget this incident. Josh was an outgoing boy who was very friendly and had no trouble fitting in. He had many friends, but we 2 were the ones he hung out with often. Unlike Josh, I was socially awkward and had only 2 friends. We could say he was a popular guy, even among girls. We often used to hang out near an abandoned building that was a little farther from the city. It was an old factory which got shut down years ago. One day, as usual, we went there after school to smoke cigarettes. Josh told us about a lake and an old boathouse which was located deep in the woods. He wanted to find that place, but I thought it was a bad idea since there were many wild animals, and I didn't want to take risks. I agreed eventually, but told them that we would come back fast. They agreed, and we went inside the forest. As we went deeper, it got darker as the forest was very dense. Finally, we reached the lake, but it got dark. After 20 minutes, I asked them to go back, but Josh refused. He stripped and jumped inside the lake while me and Max were sitting on the dock. A few minutes later, I asked him to come out. He did, and as we were preparing to leave, he said, "Let's check the boathouse while we're here." At this point, I got really pissed at him. I told him to go by himself while I waited outside with Max. Minutes later, we heard his scream. We panicked and rushed in. We saw Josh being held by two people wearing long hoods. Josh screamed for help, and as he screamed, they turned around and what we saw was no human. It only took us a second before we ran away from there as fast as we could. We came back home. Max went to his home, and we didn't tell anyone about what we saw because we knew we would get into trouble if we did. I couldn't sleep that night because I kept thinking about Josh and felt guilt because we just left him there, but there wasn't much we could do. The next day I went to school as if nothing happened and saw Josh's mom standing at the gate. She was searching for him as he hadn't come home last night. I wanted to walk past her, but she saw me and asked me if I had seen him. I said no and told her that I was with Max yesterday. In the classroom during the break, I was talking to Max about what happened yesterday and told him that we should go search for Josh. But Max didn't want to go there. He was too scared and I couldn't go alone. Max was feeling guilty as well, but he didn't want to risk his life, so we ditched the idea of going back there. 2 days passed and still, there were no signs of him. We thought he was dead by now. The search team was still trying their best to find him. At one point I thought of telling them the truth, but I didn't have the guts, thinking it was now too late. It has been 3 days since Josh's disappearance. We were in school when we got the news that Josh had returned home. At first it was hard to believe because we saw him getting captured by those two mysterious creatures. After school, we rushed to the hospital he was in and he looked fine with just a few scratches. We apologized to him for leaving him there and asked what happened with those two creatures and what were they. But he denied seeing any creature. He just said that he fell in deep hole and got lost. But I remember seeing those creatures, even Max had seen them. Josh laughed when we told him this and said that we had gone crazy. Later that evening, Max came to my house and we discussed this matter. He was concerned as well. Every day after school, me and Max used to visit Josh. Something was off about him, but we couldn't tell exactly what. Sometimes he would ask weird questions about things as if he was new to them, questions usually asked by a small child who had been introduced to a new thing. He was also more curious than usual. Josh had always been bright, but had become more eccentric and even looked sicker day by day. He had eye bags as if he hadn't slept in days, and whenever we asked him about his sudden change, he got very angry. And since then, he doesn't interact with us that often. One day when I visited Josh, I saw him sitting by the window and whispering something. I went closer and called his name, but he didn't answer. As I got closer, I heard him speaking a different language, and it didn't seem like the languages known to humans. I shouted his name again, and he stopped and looked at me as if he didn't know I was there. A few days later, he joined back to school. He had even drifted apart from us, and he stopped hanging out with us that often. He had been skipping classes and rarely talked to us. He seemed depressed and sleep-deprived all the time. A week passed, and one night I was sitting near the window with my laptop when I saw Josh walking along the streets. It was weird because it was almost midnight. I decided to go along with him, so I snuck through the back door and decided to follow him. But as soon as I got out, he was gone, and I went back inside. The next morning I saw Josh and asked where he was wandering in the middle of the night, but he said he wasn't. I thought he was just joking, so I brushed it off. 2 days later I saw Josh again, wandering at night. I was sure it was him and followed him again. This time I saw him go deep into the woods. I called out to him, but he didn't look back. At first I was a bit hesitant, but I followed him anyways. He led me to the same boathouse I saw him going in. I peeked through the window and saw him and 2 other people. They looked like the ones we saw when first came here. I tried to listen to what they were talking about, but it was not audible. Then I saw him going with them somewhere. I followed him again and they went in even deeper. What I saw next still questioned my sanity. It was a UFO and he went inside with those creatures. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't go alone to rescue him. I waited nearby, hiding behind a tree for an hour or so, but he didn't come out. I waited enough and thought it was best to go back and get help, so I ran back to the police station and told the officer everything. But he didn't believe me and laughed it all out, thinking I was pranking him. I went back home and didn't tell my parents either because I knew they'd never believe me either. I thought I lost Josh this time for sure, but he came to school the next morning. I didn't ask him about yesterday and pretended like it was a normal day. A month later, Josh became even sicker. I knew he went to meet those aliens every night, and I also knew they were the reason Josh had a personality change. What were they doing with him? Did they control his mind? There were a lot of questions. One fateful day, Josh went into a coma. I also moved states after a few days. Max is still there, and I am still in contact with him. Josh hasn't woken up from his coma yet. I am now 26 and live in Sweden. I feel like I had not been a good friend. I should have helped him instead of leaving him behind, but I was too scared. It still feels like a bad dream, or maybe I want it to feel like it was a bad dream and forget that it ever happened. But inside I knew what I saw was true, and I always think about Josh and hope he gets better and pray that those aliens would leave him alone. Story 7. This happened a few years back when people were getting abducted by aliens. Many have claimed to see them getting abducted, and even the government is not taking any action. Maybe we are not that equipped to handle aliens yet. A total of 49 people had disappeared, and there was no sign of them. A search team was conducted, but they found nothing. The families of the abducted people demanded some serious action be taken, but the government went silent on this. People have started questioning their country's security. I never thought that I would be one of those people to get abducted and would have to encounter something so horrible. Let's start from the beginning. I was in college back then, and I was in my last year. Alien abduction had become pretty normal in those days. Every day there was a new case of abduction, and honestly, I was a bit scared too. I lived with my parents and a younger brother. Our house was in the suburbs, and my best friend Emily lived right next door. One evening we were returning home from our walk when suddenly I was struck by a beam of light, and it sent me flying several feet backwards as if pushed by an unseen force. I could hear my mom screaming from a distance. I don't remember what happened next. I remember waking up in a room filled with several other people. I guessed they were the ones kidnapped before me, and I was right. I was their 50th prisoner. We didn't talk to each other, maybe because we were all scared. After a while, 3 aliens came in with a space gun-like thing and told us to line up. I was shocked to hear them speaking Earth language. Maybe they had studied us a lot. We lined up and they shot us with those guns on our necks, which left a black mark. Then they took us inside another room, which was like a big maze. As soon as we got in, the doors locked behind us and we could hear an announcement. It said that we had to play a little game if we wanted to go back home. Several weapons were lying in front of us. We could choose any one of our own choices and find the exit. But there was a catch. We had to eliminate other people, and the one with highest kill will be allowed to leave. I was shocked to hear this. Why did they abduct us? Did they bring us here for entertainment? Others were as shocked as I was. There were all sorts of people, young, old, kids, you name it. We couldn't kill each other, but we had no choice. Everyone wanted to survive, no matter what it took. It was almost like a movie, but the only difference was that this was reality and our lives were at stake. I didn't have the courage, and the people present there didn't want to do it as well. Then a man shouted, "We have to do what they tell us or no one's going to survive." The alarm went off and people started running. I grabbed a handgun and a knife. I had never used a gun in my entire life, and here I was holding it ready to kill someone. Everybody dispersed in the maze, and not long after we could hear gunshots and screams. My hands started going numb and I just ran wherever I felt like. I didn't know if I'd even survive. Maybe in a few minutes I would be the one to get shot. All these thoughts blurred my mind and I couldn't think straight. I ran and ran until I stumbled upon something and fell to the ground. I turned back and saw the dead body of a little girl. My stomach churned and tears fell from my eyes. Right then, a man in his mid-30s came and pointed his gun towards me. I knew he would shoot, so I got up and ran for it. He fired the shot but missed it by a few inches. I ran and came across many dead bodies just lying on the ground. I hid inside a bush until the coast was clear. I got out and calmed myself. I thought of finding the exit. From now on, I will be very careful, I said to myself. I had the gun and the knife, but I didn't want to use them on anyone. It was a matter of survival, and if they could kill a small girl without hesitation, my worth was nothing, and I was an easy kill. It had only been 20 minutes and the screams stopped. Most people would have been dead by now, I thought. But it meant the vicious ones were alive and looking for more people to kill. At this point, I was too scared to even move. I would say I almost gave up and accepted my fate. I sat in a corner waiting for someone to come and kill me quickly. When I thought I had lost all faith, there was another announcement. Only 2 survivors were left. I was happy that I made it this far, but also scared because now that person would do anything to hunt me down. I got up and walked. I kept walking and it felt like forever when I came across a wall. It was white, unlike the rest of the maze, and I knew it was the exit. Then I heard someone pulling the trigger behind me. I turned around and it was the same man who fired a shot at me earlier. I knew he would kill me. Flashbacks started flooding in and I thought this would be my demise. He fired the gun, but it turned out to be empty. Without any second thoughts, I pulled out the handgun and shot him multiple times while tears started falling from my eyes. He fell to the ground and I stopped. I went up to him, dropped to my knees and cried hysterically, asking for forgiveness. The door opened and I ran outside. I dropped and lay on the grass. I was tired from running. I saw the spaceship take off and felt relieved. From a distance, I could see a few people coming my way. They picked me up and I passed out. I woke up days later in the hospital. My mom was inside. And a week later, people from the media wanted to interview me. I was the only survivor among the 50 people the aliens had abducted. I didn't want to disclose whatever happened inside there, so I told them they had erased some of my memory and I don't remember any of it. It has been a few years and that incident still haunts me. I still can't forget the faces of people who had died, especially of that man whom I killed with my own hands. But since then, there have been no more cases of alien abduction. The end. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.